It's Tuesday. It's the first day of July. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gon-young. We begin with a historic shift taking place in Japan today. The Abe administration is about to reinterpret Japan's more than 6 decades-long pacifist policy in a way that'll allow Tokyo to play a greater military role in Asia. Well, Japan's ruling parties reportedly agreed on this Tuesday to lift a ban on the country's right to exercise collective self-defense. And the change is expected to be adopted in a cabinet resolution later this afternoon. Here's our Hwang Sung-hee with this report.
Japan's ruling parties have given the green light to a government proposal to end a ban that has kept the Japanese military from fighting overseas since World War II. This is according to a ruling party lawmaker who said the change will be adopted in a cabinet resolution later in the day. A draft of the cabinet resolution shows the change, which will significantly expand Japan's military options by lifting the ban on exercising collective self-defense, thereby allowing the country to aid its allies under an attack beyond its borders. Limits on activities in UN-led peacekeeping operations will also be eased. The move is being seen by some as the biggest shift in Japan's defense policy since the end of World War II. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has aggressively pursued the change since taking office 18 months ago, despite some public opposition stemming from concerns about entanglement in foreign wars. A poll conducted by Japan's Mainichi Shimbun over the weekend showed nearly 60% of the Japanese public is against the revision. Tokyo's latest move is sure to set off alarm bells in Seoul and Beijing, the victims of Japan's wartime aggression. The South Korean government has said that Japanese forces will not be allowed on the Korean peninsula without its consent. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Now, North Korea made a special proposal to the South on Monday asking to end all military hostilities starting Friday, but South Korea's top policymaker on North Korea says parts of that proposal cannot be accepted under the current circumstances. He was speaking to lawmakers at the National Assembly today, where Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae said the latest proposal is along the same lines as a so-called important proposal, which was issued by Pyongyang back in January. Back then, Pyongyang proposed to end all cross-border slandering, only to resume it again a few months later. Now, Ryu said North Korea appears to be aiming to show its efforts to mend inter-Korean ties ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's trip to South Korea, and the Unification Ministry will release its official response later today. South Korea will welcome Chinese President Xi Jinping to Seoul this week in a visit that could signal a significant shift in the region's complicated power dynamics. The Chinese leader, breaking with tradition and visiting Seoul before going to ally Pyongyang, will discuss ways to help denuclearize the Korean peninsula. And all of this during his summit talks with President Park Geun-hye. Our Park Ji-won reports.
This week's trip will mark the first time for a Chinese leader to visit South Korea before North Korea. Chinese President Xi Jinping will visit Seoul for 2 days starting this Thursday in a visit that is expected to send a strong message to Beijing's traditional ally. Relations between China and North Korea have soured recently. Beijing was not happy when Pyongyang went ahead with a third nuclear test in February of last year, despite China's warnings. China's leadership was also deeply disappointed by the purge and subsequent execution of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle Chang Song-taek late last year. Chang, who enjoyed a good relationship with Beijing, have made major contributions to an expansion of commercial ties with China, while measures to end Pyongyang's nuclear program are expected to top the agenda during their bilateral summit talks. President Xi and South Korean President Park Geun-hye will also discuss other issues, including ways to deepen their economic cooperation. Watchers say that as China is South Korea's top trade partner and South Korea has the highest number of Chinese language proficiency test takers, it's only natural the two countries' ties have strengthened. The summit meeting also signifies a shift in multilateral relations in Northeast Asia, where the traditional Cold War front of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan versus North Korea, China and Russia is looking increasingly more complex. While South Korea and China continue to butt heads with Japan over various historical and territorial disputes, Japan and North Korea are taking strides to normalize their once frosty bilateral relations. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
North Korea and Japan have resumed high-level talks in Beijing to discuss follow-up measures to agreements made on the issue of Japanese nationals abducted by North Korea decades ago. Well, the meeting comes about a month after the two countries made a deal in Stockholm on reinvestigating the abduction issue. And in return, Japan has promised to lift sanctions and resume humanitarian aid to North Korea, which marked a diplomatic breakthrough between the two states. Now, today's meeting comes just 48 hours after Pyongyang fired two short-range missiles into the East Sea, which is a body of water between Korea and Japan. Japanese officials lodged a strong protest against the launch during the opening part of that meeting. Well, the body of a person presumed to be a victim of the Seoul ferry accident was found earlier this Tuesday near an island 10 kilometers from the site of the deadly April ferry disaster. The Korea Coast Guard today said the body is of a person who was about 175 centimeters tall. DNA testing is being done to find out whether that person was one of the passengers on that ill-fated ferry. It has been a week since the last body was found, and if the body recovered today is confirmed to have been from the Seoul ferry, that will bring the number of people still missing to 10 after months of the disaster. Well, here's a piece of news that could signal a light at the end of the tunnel. Scientists around the world have tried and failed to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease since its discovery in 1906. But now a Korean research team has identified the cause of memory loss from this most common form of dementia, and it could open up gateways to treatment of the fatal brain disease. Here's our Hwang Sung-hee.
In a scene from the Korean movie A Moment to Remember, a young woman suffering from Alzheimer's disease can't find her way home. Like her, the memory loss caused by the gradual damage of brain cells can often cause people to lose their way. In fact, in Korea, around 7,600 elderly people with Alzheimer's have been reported missing yearly. The disease is not only fatal, but incurable. But now, a Korean research team has discovered the source of what leads to the loss of memory in Alzheimer's, which is raising hopes of opening a new chapter in the development of treatments. The cause of the impairment, researchers say, lies in the so-called reactive astrocytes that develop once the brain is affected by the disease. Astrocytes are the most abundant cell type in the brain, and reactive astrocytes produce an acid called gamma-aminobutyric, or GABA. They found that these acids in affected mice began to produce abnormally large amounts of GABA, a major inhibitory neurotransmitter. An experiment showed that mice that were injected with an inhibitor called selegiline, which suppresses the generation of GABA, regained their memories. However, after more than 2 weeks during which the injections were administered, the effects disappeared, which calls for the next step in the research process.
We found that the effects of selegiline grow weaker when it is taken in for a long time. We are currently working on the development of 3 kinds of MAO-B inhibitors with long-lasting efficacy.
The research, supported by the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, has been published in the highly cited medical journal Nature Medicine. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Let's now turn to the latest from the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. France made it to the quarterfinals in Monday's action, beating Nigeria 2-0. It was a relatively close match right up until Paul Pogba scored France's first goal in the 79th minute. And despite Nigeria's tireless efforts, Joseph Yobo's own goal secured France advance to the last 8. Now France will meet Germany in the next round after the Germans beat Algeria 2-1 after extra time in a thrilling end-to-end match. Germany's Andre Schürrle scored 2 minutes after the start of extra time, and Mesut Özil netted Germany's second 1 minute before the end. Algeria managed to get a consolation goal in the last minute, but it was too late to make a dramatic comeback. Kickoff time for the France-Germany quarterfinals is Saturday, July 5th at 1 a.m. Korea time. And now for a short World Cup preview. The Swiss team may need its best efforts when it faces Argentina, which, despite a somewhat weak performance in the tournament so far, boasts one of the best attacks and is still the heavy favorite to win. Belgium will take on the U.S. in the day's other round of 16 match with the stakes high for both teams. Well, the European team has not reached the quarterfinals since 1986, while the U.S. wants to ride the momentum after emerging successfully from the so-called group of death. Korea's consumer price growth stayed a little below 2% for the 8th straight month in June. And a report by Statistics Korea says the country's consumer price index rose 1.7% last month from the previous year, which is the same growth rate recorded back in May. And the report shows the core inflation rate, which excludes food and oil prices, rose 2.1% from the previous year, slightly lower than 2.2% increase that we saw back in May. The report also shows that prices for agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products have declined by 1% from the year before, while electricity, tap water, and gas prices kept the overall prices up with a jump of 4.2% in June. And moving on to the trade front, Korea logged a trade surplus for the 29th straight month in June. Seoul's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy says that exports amounted to $47.8 billion last month, which is up 2.5% from a year earlier. Imports, on the other hand, rose 4.5% from the previous year to stand at $42.6 billion, and that translates to a trade surplus of $5.29 billion. Tariffs on imported European autos have been lowered or eliminated as part of Korea's free trade agreement with the European Union, which enters its 4th year on this Tuesday. And starting today, tariffs imposed on imported autos with an engine of 1.5 liters or larger will be lifted, while tariffs levied on cars with smaller engines will be lowered from 4% to 2.6%. So the price of the Volkswagen Phaeton will go down by just over $1,000, and the maximum price cut for a Mercedes-Benz will amount to roughly $2,200.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young, every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
A new basic pension program for senior citizens aged 65 and above went into effect on this Tuesday here in Korea, and the Ministry of Health and Welfare says it will begin taking applications today. Now, under the revised program approved by the National Assembly back in May, monthly installments of up to $198 will be paid to seniors in the bottom 70% of the income bracket. And those already getting seniors' pension from the government are automatically qualified to receive the basic pension, and their first payment will be made later this month. New applicants will receive their allowances in August following a screening process to determine their eligibility. Now, Korean New Exchange, or otherwise known as the KONEX, it marks its first anniversary today, and KONEX is, of course, Korea's 3rd stock market platform, and it was designed specifically for small companies to raise capital. And it was born out of President Park Geun-hye's vision to promote an environment where startup businesses can flourish. But how well is the market doing so far? Here's our Kim Ji-yeon.
This Tuesday marks the one-year anniversary of the foundation of the Korea New Exchange, or KONEX, a stock market tailor-made for startups. KONEX was set up to make it easier for small companies to raise funds and reduce their reliance on bank loans to start and run businesses. More than 55 companies are listed in the KONEX with a total market value of $1.2 billion. KONEX falls in line with President Park Geun-hye's initiative toward a creative economy, which envisions a convergence of creative ideas and entrepreneurship to create new jobs and markets. Kim Gun-ho, the president of the KONEX Association and F&G Incorporated, which is listed on the KONEX, says his company is building experience and taking an important step toward being listed on the tech-heavy Kosdaq.
Listed companies think it's a crucial step, a trial and error period to build a relationship with potential investors before listing on the Kosdaq. But most of them have not gained financially from listing on the KONEX, not yet at least.
The lack of participation in the KONEX has been pointed out as a deficiency. The amount of transactions in an average day is less than $198,000, with less than 48,000 shares traded daily. So to induce more investors, the government has lowered the standards of qualifications. The Financial Services Commission reduced the required deposit by 1/3 to 100 million Korean won, around $99,000. The commission also slashed the minimum number of trading units from 100 shares to 1 share, the same as the Kosdaq. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Now let's move over to Korea's main stock market. Well, it's losing its momentum with the benchmark Kospi fluctuating in the smallest margin ever in the first 6 months of this year. Analysts say this is mainly due to slowing economic growth at home, and our Hwang Ji-hye explains why the smaller trade volume on the main stock market.
It seems like a pause button has been pushed on the Korean stock market. The Korea Exchange says that the nation's benchmark Kospi is losing its dynamics, with the market volatility in the first half of the year hitting its lowest point since 1990, when the market first opened. The index measuring the volatility of the market stood at a mere 0.6. The market is less volatile as it approaches zero. The figure was at over 2 in the second half of 2011, but has continued on a downward trajectory since then. The market volatility from 1990 until June this year stood at over 1.5, reflecting how stagnant the market was in the first 6 months of the year. And it's not just the dynamics, but also the number of transactions that remain subdued. The number of average daily transactions on the Kospi came in at around 23 million in the first half of the year, which marks the lowest level in 7.5 years. Analysts say the slow growth at home coming from sluggish domestic demand and slowing exports due to the strong local currency is keeping the stock market from perking up. They add that the outlook for the second half does not look that bright either, as they expect disappointing earnings from major listed companies like Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Well, we recently discussed some of the ideas being proposed to prop up the real estate market here in Korea. Now, an additional key regulation is being targeted for relaxation and the price cap for new apartments. Well, for more, Dr. Kim Byung-ju is here with me in the studio. So, Dr. Kim, to explain what this is, can we simply say that it's a measure to restrict pricing when apartment builders are trying to sell their properties?
Right, that is largely correct. When we come up with a price of an apartment, of course, there's a land price plus the construction cost, and then margin for the construction business. And there are all little details about how this is being applied, but the construction companies cannot ask for a higher price beyond certain limits here, and that is how that cap system works. a lot of Korean media has said this system has been introduced back in 2005, but I don't think that's totally correct, because I think we can go all the way back to 1977 when this system was first introduced. This was a very controversial system, then again, very omnipresent in a way throughout the time period. From 77 to 81, the system was in place, and then 82, it was abolished 81, and then reintroduced 82, and then it was there until, through variations until 1999. And then it was 2005, the system came back. And by 2007, it was fully in place, being applied to all, pretty much all, whole range of apartment housings, regardless of the house, the land ownership itself. You know, mainly it used to be an earlier period of time after it was being implemented, starting from 2005. It was largely for the public lands, but from 2007, it was being applied to all kinds of land kinds and all kinds of apartments that was built on whatever the category of land would be. And now the thing is, the ruling party yesterday had a meeting with the government officials at the National Assembly, and they said they urged the government big time to relax or deregulate this regulation. And the thing is, ruling party has tried this back in 2013, which was, I suppose, last year.
Right.
And it wasn't successful. And in 2009, it tried once again. So for ruling party, this is a big item stuff. But the thing is, they have not been very successful in abolishing this law, and many eyes are closely watching whether they will be successful this time.
Well, the last time we discussed, we discussed real estate market deregulations. We talked about reviewed overall price movements.
Right.
Now, I wonder about the overall supply and demand situation in the housing market, particularly for these new apartments.
Right. We found some interesting numbers. Let's show them here. Let's show our viewers how things are going in terms of supply and demand here, especially the market itself. The blue line that you can see here is the houses being bought and sold. It was picking up until April this year, but it's going down. So it's making the ruling party and conservative members of the political circle a little bit nervous. And the new houses unsold, meaning that they're in the market, but nobody wants it. It has increased by like 49,000 of them by May. So indeed, this number for those people who want to abolish this cap system seems to be rather alarming, we have to say.
Right, right. So basically, these are just houses that have been built, or apartments that's been built, just sitting around without any occupants, I suppose.
Right, right.
What about the trend over the long term, beyond this year even?
Right. We just saw the numbers for this year, but if we bring up next numbers, a set of numbers here, we will tell us better story here. And overall, the story is not very encouraging for those people who like to see the revival of the real estate market and apartment housing market here. Basically, these are the percentage. In January, we were seeing more active bounce back as compared to the year ago. But now, like May, the way these housings were sold and bought, it was weaker than last year. So indeed, this is not very good sign for those people who want the revival of the real estate market. And same goes to the new houses unsold here. They were being reduced as compared to the previous year during the first 4 months this year. But May, we are seeing once again the rise of this number of unsold housings actually exceeding the figure that we had May last year. So no good sign for those people who want the revival.
Right. So I suppose it goes hand in hand with the sluggish housing market transactions.
Indeed, indeed.
Now, what is the outlook for the regulations? I mean, we earlier talked about DTI and LTV and all these regulations on the housing market that may be lifted in the near future.
Right.
And now the price cap. Are we going to see all of them lifted?
Well, the way I see it, this price cap system is much more controversial than LTV and DTI and so on, because looking at those numbers that we just saw, a lot of people are saying, indeed, well, if you cannot sell your cars that newly built, do you increase the price? Do you make them even more expensive? Is that how it goes? The critics and skeptics are saying that. So making those houses more expensive, what are they for? For whom are they going to act that way? The criticism is very strong, and the opposition is very strong. Opposition party members, they're saying, they oppose the idea, but they are willing to talk. So I don't know what the compromise will be this time, but they have been, as I said before, quite successful in opposing the idea as a whole. And the critics once again say this cap system itself particularly is for construction companies. And construction companies, what do we have to do for them here at this stage of the current condition of the construction market? Many of the economists are saying we have to focus on restructuring them rather than artificially propping them up here for the sake of their business and for the sake of financial industry that holds a lot of debt from the construction industry. So I think the fight will be pretty tough and at the National Assembly. I think we will continue to hear a lot of discussions and disputes over this matter.
Definitely. I mean, the real estate market, it was once the mover and shaker of the Korean economy, you know, and now it's again a mover and shaker with this sluggish trade volume. So definitely one issue that we want it stabilized.
Exactly.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's your business today on this Tuesday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.